All right, we'll do it. Um, it's a pleasure to be here with you all, and especially to be able to say a few words about Giampiero and Zeffiro. Um, and I'll probably have a hard time being brief, but I'll say a few words here about these guys. I first met Giampiero many years ago at a TA conference in Nova Scotia. And there was to be a keynote speech by Giampiero Petrigliari, and there was Giampiero and Pietro Petrigliari. And I made a false assumption, thinking that Giampiero was the older fellow, the senior representatives of the Italian TA community, and he would be giving the keynote, but lo and behold, I had it backwards, and it was Giampiero. I don't remember a word of what Giampiero said in the keynote, but we spent hours talking together, and it was a bright and lively and aggressive mind that I hoped I was going to get the opportunity to know him over the years, and that proved to be the case. We got to hang out in a lot of different contexts. Giampiero became the president of the ITAA, the first person to be president of the ITAA with no formal TA certification. And since then has moved on to be a professor of leadership and management at INSEAD in Fontainebleau, where he's a rather prolific author in a variety of academic journals, and also in the more popular press, really representing the relationship between psychological and social issues and the interface with leadership. Giampiero and Zeffiro share some interesting history. Zeffiro and I have not been able to hang out in person nearly as much as we might like, but God knows we've hung out a lot in email. So working initially with Zeffiro's articles for the TAJ, and then having the pleasure of working with him in editing this amazing book. We share a long and rather passionate interest in working with psychosis and schizophrenics, and it's rare to come across someone of a really keen intelligence and a fundamental humanity. That's what comes through in Zeffiro's book. And I just want to read one brief, this is from Zeffiro's acknowledgements. This journey, however, would not even have been possible without meeting and developing a very long-standing and professional and personal relationship with Pietro Petrigliari. And Zeffiro goes on to describe his relationship and his learning, and I think there found a basis for compassion and humanity that Giampiero and Zeffiro share. Two guys who haven't been afraid to stand at the edge of things sometimes and cause trouble, who have that rare combination of aggression and compassion. And so it's a pleasure to say hi to you guys, and eager to hear what you have.
Thank you, Bill.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks.
Yep.
Lovely to be here. Zeffiro.
Hello.
Where do we start? The naked self. I think Bill said aggression and compassion, and you we come a long way, and in some pieces of the road similar, some different. And I think we should just jump right into the title of the book.
Yeah.
What is the naked self, and what does it mean? Where did that come to you?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, first of all, it's, it came as an idea at the beginning, and it's difficult to clearly, understand how I ended up choosing this title. It's more about the fact that the concept of nakedness, the nudity of being, was somehow resonating within myself when I started working with these patients, and I learned more about their vulnerability. They used to present to me as quite vulnerable people, and exposed to the scrutiny of myself, but of others in general. And so the idea of nakedness, I think, was intimately connected to this subjective experience of the schizophrenic, being, somehow under the light of the other, of a big other, who can be sometimes undecipherable and out of reach. And so the naked self came later to somehow referring to the deepest layers of our being, and also to is somehow connected to those unlanguaged experiences of the self, and of the self being in relation to others. And so very much, in line with what Byrne said around the tissue level of experience, and which later he named in terms of Primary Protocol, and authors like Bill Cornell himself and Mick Landage further developed over the years, by focusing on the protocol aspect of relationship. And so it's all of this. I mean, I could talk. I mean, it's the real core of the book. It's around how we can learn to meet the naked self within ourselves phenomenologically, and also in the relationship with the psychotic patients. And so it's fundamentally a psychological reality which is rooted in our body, and structurally I refer this reality to the child experience of the ego, what we call the child ego state in transactional analysis terms.
It's kind of most essential beginning.
Yeah.
State of possibility. What it strikes me is that I want to get a little bit. I want to talk about the book first, and then get a little bit later into how we met and our shared history that Bill sort of hinted at. What struck me, I remember the first time I met you, you said something to me along the lines, "I'd like to write one day." And I said, "Which day?" And then we kind of stayed in touch. And then one day I learned about your manuscript, and I was delighted, and I got a copy of the book, and I thought, wow, you did not hang around. It's an amazing literary debut. It's your first book, if people don't know. And I mean, I didn't really quite know how to read it. Like, it's a scholarly book. It's a clinical book. It's poetic, right? And if someone that knows you a little know that you are all those things. You're a scholar, and in a way, it's very brave. And I think the way I'd like to structure the conversation, and maybe you can help us. This is how I read the book. I read the book in two ways. At some level, you picked one of the most complex conditions in mental health, schizophrenia and very severe psychosis. And then you also picked one of the most complex theoretical issues in psychology and in sociology, which is the nature of the self and its relationship to others, a place in the world and on the ego. And it's interesting because, I mean, as someone that straddles the two worlds, I read it as a clinician, as a book on schizophrenia, but I also read it as a scholar of identity, as actually a book that uses schizophrenia to make a point about the self, and I think in the whole book, it's clear that you refuse to kind of deprive schizophrenia of personhood. It's obvious, and therefore it allows us to learn things from these people, not just about schizophrenia, but about everyone. And I'm interested, when I think of that duality between the personal and the clinical and the scholarly, what moved you to write this? Because it's a very bold, it's a very brave book. How did you? And I think, it's a kind of corny, usual question to authors, why did you write this book? But I'm also interested, what kept you going?
Yeah. Well, thanks for this question. I mean, you put it beautifully. I mean, this book does connect to various levels. Yes, not only to clinical psychiatry or psychopathology, but you're right. There's some elements coming from social psychology and sociology, and I mean, it's primarily this book, I would say, derived directly from my clinical work, from my actual encounters with people suffering from psychosis, especially those at the very first episode of schizophrenia, which look quite different from those who have been already under medication for years and been changing teams and responsible clinicians over time. So when you deal with I would say relatively young people on the verge of a psychotic breakdown, a psychotic crisis, then you definitely need to connect to something which is also more existential, because they are all somehow going through an existential crisis as well. It's not just about internal objects that we normally are accustomed to, but it's about their life. And so we need to to be humble in the process. And
what's the crisis? Say a bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, you said something like schizophrenia it's a really complex symptom. It is a sort of an enigmatic phenomenon for people who've been studying this disorder of the mind and brain for years. But it's more than puzzling. It's schizophrenia. It's scary. I mean, it does scare people. It does scare the most, I mean, the closest persons around the patient, and so it does move strong feelings, strong fantasies in others' minds, including us as mental health professionals. And so it's something which is very disturbing in various ways. And the issues around writing, it's a complex issue, because I mean, writing started for sure as a desire, to collect ideas and to try to make sense of a clinical material which was already too much since the beginning. I mean, you have to imagine, I started seeing this patient quite early in my career. I was still a young, trainee in psychiatry, receiving regular supervision from my senior consultant, and at the same time having the possibility to join a training in transactional analysis in Rome. It was a very enriching, very stimulating period of my life. But nevertheless, meeting with this patient was too scary. And writing was also for me a way of was somehow, I wouldn't say I mean, it's almost like a therapeutic process, right, for itself, in a sense that it keeps going. Writing itself was a way of trusting my unconscious, trusting the patient's unconscious, and trusting also the idea that psychosis can be understood. It's an understandable phenomenon, and it takes time. It takes also the humility, not only the courage, but also the humility to seek help and to seek supervision from senior colleagues, because you get lost in the process. I mean, I've got lost in the process of therapy, with the aim of helping these young patients. I lost myself sometimes, and I had to to write stuff also because I was noticing that the therapeutic process at some level was affecting my reflective capacity and my receptiveness during sessions, which is a terrible thing to experience for any one of us who've been in this dark place where you're losing connection to not only to time and space, but also to your own to your own trust around the ideas you're developing and the images that come to your mind when you are in front of the patient. That is quite scary,
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Is the impression I have reading the book is that, again, it's the idea of courage, that you don't look away. That we are hearing about people that I've had many times the experience of having been avoided for fear and you keep looking.
Yeah.
And you keep looking and you hold on to, and I think at some level maybe all writing is that attempt to not look away from something that it would be easier to ignore or to forget. I also wondered if the NAIC itself is a little bit, the experience of the clinician in front of the, these are patients that, very often a lot of, there's not a lot of theory, there isn't a lot of tools, there are tidbits of ideas and attempts, but very often, and I think you do a magnificent effort to bring together all that you have, your neurobiological background, your certainly your transactional analysis, your psychiatry, and obviously I encourage everyone to buy the book to really get a feel for it. What I love about it is that you humanize without romanticizing mental suffering, without pretending is what it's not. And I guess I'm interested in your use, or in what you found useful in transactional analysis, because transactional analysis itself has had a complicated history with psychosis. And so what did you find in TA that helped you, and what did you find was missing that made you want to write this book?
Yeah, I mean, clearly I was as I said earlier, I started seeing these people quite early in my career, and at that time the only frame of reference I had, and in order to trying to disentangle some of the experience of the psychotic self, was the model of given by Schiff around sort of a transactional analysis approach to psychosis, but coming from a perspective which was how can I say, I mean, it was quite intuitive for me to apply that model for people who had been already through a number of psychotic breakdowns and relapses, because there is a sort of symbiotic dimension when you engage with this kind of suffering. But that model was not sufficient at all, and was actually misleading when I tried to approach people, very young people, like, you know, in their early 20s, who were experiencing the first episode of psychosis, because there was something more taking place in the relationship. And that something was more around the body, you know, the bodily dimension of relationality. I mean, I used to struggle during my very first session with this patient, because these sessions were filled with long silences and pauses and suspiciousness and mumbling, and so you get easily, you know, uneasy. You're there, but your mind starts going somewhere else. And that's
you try to find cover, right? You can't find cover.
Yes, and then you start, you know, you start talking about the weather. You start talking about medication. You know, you're trying to fill in the gaps, which are enormous in the relationship. But as much as you do that, you know, words become like stones for this kind of patients, and you may actually be received as an intrusive guy rather than a receptive one. And so all this stuff was going on, and then I kept, you know, reading and rereading Burns' writing on around, especially those contributions, the early ones around primal images, primal protocol, unconscious communication. So we are talking about a pre-transactional analysis writings of Byrne on the unconscious process. And there are actually some clinical cases depicted there by him, also on schizophrenic people, even before he developed the concept of exclusion. Because all the idea you were saying, you know, the invitation we were making before around maybe the naked self does pertain the therapist as well. Of course. I mean, of course. It's the nature of the exclusion. It's like Byrne lucidly put it, you know, exclusion is like a one-way glass. I kept reminding myself this because it does have methodological implications, not only theoretical implications. We always need to remember that the exclusion process has both two sides. You know, when we work with exclusion, we need to keep in mind that we need to work on both sides of the problem. If we pretend that we can cure or look after someone in the midst of a psychotic crisis, neglecting the family group, the family milieu where this person is coming from, we are just doing half of the job. But at the same time, if you offer the family or caregivers a mere approach, which could be even relational, systemic, but then you do not include the patient and in the process, again, you're not valuing the reflective capacity of the psychotic self, because an adult is still there, is still developing, is still trying to integrate stuff, but it's just struggling. It's too much. Everything is too much for the psychotic self. It can get easily too much for the therapist who is engaged and involved in the same process. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, because
you are. I mean, I was thinking it's you know, in a way, the other side of exclusion is oppression, of course.
Yeah.
And you know, there's always the possibility of becoming oppressive, even with an attempt to cure. So what do you think? What do you wish for people who read the book? You know, who do you think can use this book, and what do you wish? What's your wish for them? People who work with psychosis. I know you didn't just write it for them. I know you also clearly wrote it for people who witness this experience or live with it. But what do you wish for people like you who genuinely wanna help and find themselves that, you know, tools can become weapons? And the lack of tools can be jarring. In a way, it's done if you do and done if you don't.
Yeah. I mean, it's, yeah, the book was, you know, primarily written for people within the mental health field, really. I mean, the idea was to
No, it's
try
not.
to,
No,
I
it's
mean,
not. No, it's not.
you're right. I mean, it's both. Okay, it's such a, it's difficult to say, but it's also, of course, it's an invitation also for people who are facing psychosis themselves and for their caregivers as well. I mean, as I was saying before, you know, schizophrenia is not a totally bizarre phenomenon. It's something which can be understood, but has to be approached as, we have to develop a different proximity to this kind of patients. But what we're doing, I mean, we get them hospitalized and we pretend that we can treat aggressively with medication experiences of the self, which are so linked to intimate experiences. And so we really need, you know, it's an invitation to maybe look at psychosis from a different angle, which would be the angle of the patient. So it's clearly an invitation for a phenomenological, a phenomenological inquiry, I would say, into the world of psychosis.
Yeah. I mean, I also think you challenge the idea of the client comes to see you, right? This idea of seeing, and as if treatment is like seeing and talk. And there's a central point in the book which I took to literally, but also symbolically, where you talk about how important it was for you to visit homes. And I think, you know, this idea that you have to approach these patients as opposed to see them. It's not just a matter of looking, it's also bringing yourself there. Can you say a little bit about what it meant and what it did for you to not see these patients in a hospital or in a day hospital, which you also did, I'm sure, but to actually go to their homes? Because that's a big part of what, I mean, if I understand, that's shaped your career. I don't know if our listeners know, but Zephyro is a specialist in home treatment and residential treatment. So I think it'd be wonderful for readers to learn a little bit about how some of what's in the book has also shaped your trajectory, your approach to the profession.
Yeah, I mean, you're super good, Jean-Pierre. You're super good to just raise, you know, the questions that, you know, I've been struggling with, you know, during the writing process. I mean, you're definitely right. The possibility of entering people's house in the midst of a
the
crisis.
Real house, right? Not the fantasy.
The real house.
The real house.
Real house with real family members and neighbors sometimes, and you know, and managers from work. You know, all kind of situation can happen as soon as you make a step into the house and the life, the real life of someone, especially if that person is living a psychotic crisis. And it just changed everything, to be honest, because I approached psychosis during my specialty training as mostly coming from a biological background.
A syndrome.
Like a syndrome, exactly. And you know, and I was enrolled in a couple of years project, neuroimaging project, tracing hippocampal shape in first episode schizophrenia. So, you know, something very, very biological to start with, but it was not sufficient at all to understand all the complexity of someone's life in you know, during a crisis like the one we're talking about today. And it's,
you know, I find most amazing, just stay with that, because I think you're one of the people who has the most expertise in the world, because you've done your specialty training in a hospital. Then you go and work in a neuroscience lab in London. Then you also work as a psychotherapist in private practice. And then the kind of all revealing scene in the book is when you enter these homes. It's like you have to travel the world, the scholarly world and the actual European world, to then find what you were looking for in the house.
Yeah.
What's there that you couldn't find in any other place?
Wow. I mean, it's complicated.
Yeah.
You know, in Italian, you know, we have like, when we use the word casa, no, you know, we use interchangeably, right? Meaning house and home at the same time. And it's something which is mixed up and it's mingled in my mind as well, in the sense that, you know, home is the actual place where, you know, our patients are still fighting their own battles and real struggles. You know, they are living through real vicissitudes, and but at the same time is the place of origin, is the place where everyone has developed a sense of belonging to someone, or maybe not, you know. And it's a disturbing place.
Yeah.
It's a disturbing place. It's a place where you can feel acknowledged, you can feel a sense of being loved, wanted, recognized, or not.
Yeah.
And that's the peculiarity of this setting, because everything is in there.
And so how did it change the way you know, understood therapy and your work?
Yeah. I mean, you already, you know, made the point when you said it's just the opposite of seeing patients, or, you know, of getting them to see you in your office. You know, it's just the opposite. It's something like what Christopher Bollas said, and when he talked about, you know, people with very not psychotic people, but people with very disordered sense of the self, when he said something like, you know, it's just the opposite of empathy. It's not being in someone else's shoes, but it's just, if you really want to meet this patient, to encounter them at their level of suffering, you just need to make room within yourself in order to understand them. I mean, I'm not saying something, you know, new. It's much more in line with Beyond.
No, but you are, I think you are saying something new. I think you are saying something new, because I think what you're saying is it's not enough to make room, you know, for there's, like, you have to go in the place where they're suffering.
Yeah.
And understand why one could suffer in a place that ideally could be, I mean, if you think about it metaphorically, I really was struck with, and obviously this interests me, it touches my work a lot, and this idea of home. And it struck me that you're going to these homes, and home is a very powerful metaphor in the book, because you know, technically home could be a place where you can be naked, and maybe the one place where that will be okay. And might actually be fun. But for these people, it's not. For you, it's not in that place. It's a place, you know, and to be at home in a place where being naked, you know, for your home to be a place where being naked is suffering, exposure, vulnerability, fragmentation, and whatnot. That, I think, doubles the suffering. You know, if you were naked in the street and you suffered, well, I mean, bad luck. But to be naked at home and suffer and feel exposed and judged and oppressed, that's something else. And you see, and I wondered if home in a way wasn't didn't capture something that you were trying to get at, which is the fate of a self without identity. You know, as I was thinking of a naked self, of a self without a clear identity, you know, that the lens that explains the self to yourself, who you are, where you belong in time, the place in the world, you know, and in your book, in a way, there's this sense of I'm in a location, but I'm not in a place. I'm here, but I'm not sure what here and now here. It's almost like it's a self before selfhood.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, before the self acquires that sense of unity and and connection that makes you feel I am X.
Yeah.
No, then I think, do you want to say a little bit more? What is it like to live in such a self? What's it like to be in a self that doesn't have a home?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it does, you know, it does refer to really to those tissue level of experience Bern was, you know, was writing about at the beginning. It's like, it can be very, very disturbing, because it's like sometimes perceiving yourself not just as a, you know, not only as a human being in need of someone or something to find its own integrity. It's also like feeling a living thing, you know, like a thing who's there, can be receptive even without being conscious of what's going on around. So you're right. I mean, this naked self, it's about the self before the integrity of the adult. It's a self who's still developing and who's still in need of orientation to reality. So before reality testing, we need, you know, the possibility to sense reality, also the psychological reality of others, which comes through body processes, at least at the beginning of our development. But it's something which is still here with us, even as adult.
So is that what you do? Is that what you do as a therapist when you approach this home, these families? This is you go and try to make a house a home.
Yeah, and also it's, you know, home is a place where we create and receive hospitality as well. You know, we make new encounters. But you know, when we think about schizophrenia or severe form of psychosis, you know, mind goes almost immediately to the hospital setting, which, you know, which is interesting. I mean,
which is not often a hospitable
exactly,
setting.
yeah. I mean, I was thinking also about, you know, the interplay between hospitality and hospital, you know. I mean, there are all these you know, processes involved. It's about giving, receiving, but it's also about accepting of not knowing what is behind that door. Yeah. And also about approaching, you know, family members and caregivers also from a different perspective, because I think psychiatry also sometimes had, you know, a wrong perspective also on the family members of these patients. They thought they were somehow responsible for the suffering of their loved ones, or you know, I mean, the literature is full of references to the schizophrenic mother and schizophrenogenic mother and this kind of stuff, which are not accurate, because as soon as you approach someone, even a caregiver who's trying to do his best to look after a son, a daughter affected by psychosis, then you encounter the same vulnerability that you as a professional would encounter in the therapeutic process.
That's what I love in the book. Like, you don't take sides. You know, it's almost like you write about the client's experience, the therapist's experience, and I think it's very important therapeutically not to take sides if in systems which have very few boundaries, which have, you know, either no boundaries or very rigid boundaries and all of that. And then something happens, which is you shift and you say, well, it's like I entered this, you know, these environments to learn about schizophrenia and therapy, and you come out learning something about the self, something more fundamental about, you know, human development. What is it?
Yeah, I mean, it's connected to I mean, it's once again, you know, connected to the sense of belonging and possibly trust. And we have to, we have also to admit as professional, we are often lacking trust in each other's, and also as we're struggling to connect to other professionals when we are dealing with complex matters like psychosis. So the problem of the self is the problem we're all living in now, facing this global health crisis. I could not imagine that when I was writing this book, we would also face, a crisis like the one we are living now, where I think, at least phenomenologically, any one of us can reach this level of, uncertainty and ontological precariousness and insecurity, which resembles at some level that kind of disorientation.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, I was thinking that it's like, I was thinking that there's something about a mode of functioning. It's almost like a moment of existential collapse.
It is.
Where the future has disappeared.
Yeah.
And
so you imagine living in this kind of situation for days and weeks and months.
Without a collective going through sharing your same existential fracture. Yeah. The isolation.
So yeah,
and it's interesting then, because I was very touched by the conclusion, the last chapter of the book, where you don't really, although you've done an amazing, you've offered people theories and tools and practices, and at some point you kind of say, I just want to keep you company. I just want to keep you company. And I thought, just how powerful in a situation in which as a patient or as a clinician, you might feel, actually maybe not even shame, because shame would assume there is there would be systems to feel shame, but just in feeling so disorganized and lost, and to not be alone. And that reminded me how I met you. So our first meeting, was I think kind of early on in your career, and it was 2007, 2008, and we didn't meet in Sicily, although we did train in the same medical school and training program. But I was already the president of the ITAA, and for a variety of reasons, I think the ITAA conference in San Francisco, and you came to the conference with my dad. Which I would normally, I had taken him to conferences in the past, but I was at the time, I had meetings before, I don't remember what the story was, but and he was already not so well, so he didn't trust flying that long on his own, but he wanted to be at the conference. And so he was like, oh, I'm going to tell, Zephyr. And I had heard about you, how brilliant you were, and how much he loved you. And so you showed up with him, and, I know how much it meant. I know how much it meant to him at so many levels that you kept him company, and I saw you do that, and also what it meant to you and what fun it was, and all that, yeah. And so I just like, God, I wish he could watch this. I wish he could watch this. He would have loved it. He would have loved it, because he was really not a very good writer, and he suffered so much for it.
It was my Socrates. I told
and
him.
I remember when you said you wanted to write, I thought, God, that would be really like that would really be like showing your, you're doing something that, obviously he had struggled and he so loved. And when you said like, oh, you are not sure about writing, it's like, come on, do it. And I didn't want to say at the time, like, it would mean so much, like, don't get stuck there, grow out of it.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, if I can say it,
and I'm so proud you didn't. I'm so proud you kind of, you took what you took, and also left what you needed to leave. I'm grateful you came that summer.
Thanks. That was a true gift, Jean-Pierre, and you know that, and a gift.
You know, I've always I always thought of you as like a little brother in all the nice and awful ways.
Me too. And yeah, I mean,
I'm interested in, how do you do that? How do you grow? How do you take a mentor and grow beyond their capacity? Because I think, let's face it, there's a lot of Stockholm syndrome in psychotherapy training of young junior people who don't go beyond what their mentors have done.
Well, but yeah, I mean,
you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I know. I mean, your father.
We have had conversations about this. You can.
We yes, of course. I mean, Professor Petrulli was not just like a mentor, or he truly prescribed himself in the relationship for years, and I still remember the first time I asked him to attend a session in his private office, and he welcomed me, and I sat there and said, I don't know why I'm really here today, something like this. And he started a conversation saying, okay, I mean, this is a good point to start with. That's what he said. I mean, and I will tell you more. If you're here today, it's because someone else, your parents or someone on their behalf, has done he said it's done a good enough job. And that was something hard for me to listen to, because I was in trouble, with my family. And hearing that was the starting point of a process. So all the issues around parent exclusions and, started, I guess, from that meeting. And there's something which is not in the book, actually, which came much later, which is about the home visits. You may not know this, actually, but he was, your father was the first one who sent me for a home visit in Catania for a young lady in her early 30s who was diagnosed as a sociophobic.
He loved doing home visits.
Yeah, I mean, he couldn't make it, and he asked me a favor, okay? But the contract was, if something goes wrong, you need to call me on the mobile phone, but I mean, I was getting there with the idea, I had to deal with, someone who was suffering from a phobic disorder, and I was almost ready to prescribe some medication and stuff. And you guess what? The session took me 3 hours.
Wow.
I stayed in that house 3 hours. He got concerned. He called me on the mobile phone because I was a trainee. But yes, I mean, you're laughing now, but
no, that would be like, it's so classic him, just do this, and then it's like, what are you doing?
But think about this, Jean-Pierre. We never shared this before, but that was the beginning of my career as a home treatment.
Yes, because you went
I mean,
you went to a troubled home.
Yeah.
Not alone.
Yeah, and definitely she was not a sociophobic person. There was much more in there.
Zephyr, that's the book.
So
like you can approach the most troubled home with forgiveness, if you're not on your own. If you're not on your own. And that explains, I felt like one of the things that, we're getting close to the top of the hour. One of the things that touched me was this passage at the end of the book. You kind of put aside everything, and then you speak directly to people who suffer from psychosis, and you write this sort of thing. And I think, I couldn't it's just hard for me not to read your words and not hear my dad in some way speaking like this through you, and then also hearing you. These are clearly your words, and they're so poetic. He says, set these thoughts free, make sure they don't carry on being repeated in the same way. At the end of the day, act in such a way that another engages with you in what you most fear, your madness, so that your ego can blossom from the most precious frailties of your being. Likewise, make a treasure of your solitude, which is not isolation, but preparation for intimacy, for new encounters with others, for new returns home, refinding from time to time the others of the past which reside within and without us. Do not fear medication, as long as it is prescribed by someone who is caring for you as a person. Always give yourself a good dose of art and music. Walk in nature. Learn, if you don't already, to love animals. And this is a lot more poetic than I'm okay, you're okay. A lot more poetic.
And you were getting
And there's so much possibility, so much permission. It's like a new beginning. It really is a new beginning. And on that note, you have become a father as you were writing this book.
Okay, actually, yeah, a second time being a father.
How's that affected you?
Oh wow. Yeah, I'm actually on paternity leave. Yes, I'm at home and I'm on paternity leave. And if you hear, noises, voices, these are not hallucination. They're proper sounds. It's my daughter screaming and shouting. And but yes, I mean, I've certainly become, more receptive over the years. I mean, I've become. How can I say, more receptive, less talkative, maybe, in the sessions, and also with friends and family. And also more intimate, definitely, and becoming a father. I mean, has doubled or tripled the responsibility also of approaching a vulnerable patient, because some of them do remind me of newborn babies who need to be gently introduced to reality, especially when reality is too much. And we have all experienced this.
Maybe I should also introduce you to, I know we're almost at the end, but I was wondering if we have 2 minutes, if there's someone, I feel like I've had you for myself for the whole hour and I don't want to let you go, but maybe someone wants to ask a question, just write it in the chat and I will ask it to Zefiro. It's, introducing to reality.
The so-called reality, because someone may question even that.
Have you? Oh, someone was asking Zefiro. I guess these days, given we are talking about such intimate experience, home visits, and all of that, and in these days of social distancing and all of that, have you had online sessions, and do you have thoughts about that?
No, not at all. I mean, I didn't have the possibility and even the time to do it. I mean, because as possibly some of you know, I'm still working actively with a new home treatment team and in Switzerland, and we kept going despite the pandemics, and actually people welcomed more, were less frightened to be helped in their houses rather than to, especially during the first lockdown. I mean, and it's also obvious because hospitals at the beginning were the places where
in a way, it removes the stigma, right?
Yeah.
Risk for you. Yeah, there's
Yeah.
more risk that removes the stigma. Zafiro, we're doing this online. I wish I could give you a hug.
Me too,
So first of all,
God.
let me say thank you for just being your wonderful self. You're such sharp mind and deep heart, and you're an inspiration. Second, I want to tell everyone there's a link in the chat that you can click now and go and buy Zafiro's book straight away. Don't leave, don't go to do whatever else you were doing before you've got the book, because we've just scratched the surface of the incredible intellectual depth and compassion and stories that Zafiro has to say. I'm not going to ask you that awful question, of what's your next book going to be? It's your business, but I will be looking forward to reading it.
Thanks, Piero.
Love you.
Love you too.
Take care.
Bye.